First, I want to say that I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I want to give thanks to those of you who put this together, and especially to Kathy Smith. And I want to remember my dear friend, and I think a dear friend to many of you here, Bert Smith, who passed away recently, who would have surely been here today, thank you. Bert Smith, and you've heard me say this before, a lot of people don't know where the Sagebrush Rebellion started in the mid-1970s, but Bert Smith was the guy that wrote the first Sagebrush Rebellion resolution. And yesterday I told you about what caused the Dear Range User letter that caused 800 ranchers to show up at Elko, and that was in the summer. And that fall, at the Cattlemen's Convention, I walk into the Stockman's Hotel, and Bert said, "Hey, come to the room with me. I've got a resolution I want you to read." And then we took it to the chair of our Public Lands Committee, and he said, "This won't ever pass," and it passed there, and then it passed at the National Convention in January, and the Sagebrush Rebellion was on its way. That's where it started, with Bert. Then we started getting together in the early 80s here in Salt Lake, because it was an easy place to fly into or drive into. Wayne Hage, Bert Smith, Vaughn Sorensen, who am I trying to think of from New Mexico? Bud Eppers. You remember Bud Eppers? Anyway, there were like 7 or 8 of us. We would come in at night, we'd have a meeting, we'd meet till late, we'd get up and we'd meet the next morning, and primarily it was Wayne Hage teaching us about our private rights on the public land. Last night you heard Ramona say that her brother, Wayne, represented himself in a lot of the court proceedings that they have been involved in. And I just want you to know that, usually they say that someone who represents themselves as a fool for a client, and that's not the case with young Wayne Hage. And for young Wayne Hage and for Ramona, I want to say that all of us owe them a great debt. And young Wayne Hage, if you listen to him, he knows a lot of the law and does a very great job. Gary asked us if we knew how many acres there were in the United States. There are 70 million acres in Nevada that are owned and controlled by the federal government, 87% of our state. 53% of all of the land west of Colorado is owned and controlled by the federal government. Our Enabling Act in Nevada is identical to the Enabling Act in Nebraska, word for word. Nebraska has 3% public land, we have 87%. So what I want to talk to you today is about the only solution big enough to solve these many problems that we're talking about. And I want you to go away from here thinking, yeah, this can happen. Even Ramona last night, said, yeah, it'll be great if that can happen. Well, it can happen. And I want to see it happen. While I'm still here, I got bucked off last October and broke some ribs, and was in the hospital a while, and people told me, you shouldn't be riding young horses in your old age. And I said, I just turned 73. I think I've only got 30 good years left, and I'm going to spend every one of those days on horseback that I can. I'm not going to ride some old broken down horse all the time. And primarily what I want to see happen, and I don't want to wait 30 years to see it, is the land transferred. How many of you have had any dealings with the National Riparian Service team? They are under contract, and I don't know, they still may be under contract with BLM and Forest Service to try to, they go around and meet with different groups and try to pour oil on the water and make things better in the relationship between the people that the agencies are managing and the agencies. So they came to Nevada and met with our Nevada Association of Counties, and there were 4 of us representing the NACO that met with them, and they started telling us, we just want to come and find out what your concerns are. We want to take those to the agencies. We want to bring their concerns back to you, and we want to get this so that we can all kind of have hugs all around and get along. And so I sat and listened for quite a while, and then pretty soon I said, you know what? It's just too late. Just too late. The gap is too wide. Where the direction that comes, that manages us on our public lands, where that direction comes from is too far away. It's too far to Washington. And these were good people. And there are good people here, good people, agency people. Terry, you just heard him. You know, I think Terry's a good man. Neil Cornsey came, the national director of BLM, came to Elko, and he met with a bunch of us, and we were sitting around a big circle, and I said, or he was telling us how we all need to get along, and finally I said, you know, Neil, what's finally going to happen, and you were raised here in Elko, and we know you're a good guy. When this land transfers from the federal government to the state, we're going to need good guys to be in those kind of positions, because we're still going to have bureaucrats, and you ought to come and be the state director for the state lands in Nevada. He thought, yeah, well, that's what he said. That's not what he thought. But you know, the problem is, and it reminds me of when I was a kid. In Star Valley, we had party lines on our telephones, and you'd crank the phone, and if your ring was 3, it rang 3 times, and so on. Anyway, but anybody on there could listen in on your conversations. And over on the end of the valley was the 71 Ranch, and Bill Wright was talking to somebody on the phone, and another neighbor, another ranch in between, was owned by Pete Griswold, and he had a wheeze. When he would talk, you could hear him wheeze, and he and so Bill Wright was on the phone, and he could hear Pete wheezing on the phone, and he said, Pete, hang up your phone. And Pete said, hell, Bill, I'm not on the phone. And we started calling, I heard people call that a Griswold. When you know that what you're saying is a lie, you know that what the person that's listening to you knows that it's a lie, and you say it anyway. But in the case of the agencies, sometimes they have to say it because that's the direction that they're getting, and sometimes they'll tell you things that they know are not going to happen, can't happen this way, but they have to tell you that, and because their direction comes from a long ways away. Reminds me of and I'll hurry, Angus, because I know we're up against the clock here, but I got to tell you about my favorite liar story, and some of you have heard it before because I tell it too many times, but the teacher went to the principal one day and said, you know, I've got a terrible problem with a boy in my class. Every morning when he comes to school, he tells me a big lie. The principal said, well, next time he tells you a lie, send him up to me. I'll tell him a bigger one. Maybe he'll get the idea and he'll quit doing that. So the next morning, the boy came to school, said, yesterday my grandfather and I were fishing, and we caught a fish so big we pulled him in the boat and broke the boat. And the teacher said, that was a big fish. Go tell that story to the principal. So he went up and he told the principal the story, and the principal said, that's nothing. He said, just this morning, I was coming down the sidewalk just about to the school, and out of the bushes right next to me stepped this great big bear. And from the other side of me, I see this little bitty dog, and that little dog jumped up and he grabbed that bear right by the throat and he killed him. And the boy said, that was my dog. And he said, that's not the first bear he's killed either. Anyway, when I told the riparian team that the gap was too wide, then I got out the report of the Nevada Land Management Task Force to the Nevada Interim Legislative Committee on Public Lands, Congressional Transfer of Public Lands to the state of Nevada, and started going through it with them. And they found it pretty interesting. And that was some fun. But I want to give you a little history on how this happened. In 2009, and since we have been talking about the Forest Service here, 2009, the Forest Service came to our county commission and said, we are going to do a travel management plan. We don't plan on closing any roads. And so we signed up as a cooperating agency. We said we'll be a coordinating, we'll do everything. And so we did. And we find out in about 2 weeks that actually they have a systems map, and everything that is on that isn't on that map then doesn't exist anymore as far as roads go. And we go around saying that was over 1,000 miles of roads, because it's hard to believe that it would be 1,000 miles, let alone 15, but it was over 1,500 miles of roads that were actually going to be closed. So we started trying to work with the Forest Service. We documented 104 contacts between then and 2012 with the Forest Service. We hired a facilitator. We got them to share on the expense with the facilitator so that they would be invested. The facilitator was a professor up at the college to help us work through our issues. We tried to get them to use our land use management plan. Anyway, we did everything that we could. They were not going to mark the roads closed that were closed. They were only going to mark the ones that were open, and give it a number, and then you have to have a map show where you were if you're on a road that's closed. And they've been real slow to implement this thing, but it's just starting. Then you're subject to a $5,000 fine. If you want to contest that, you go to federal court in Reno, 300 miles away. All right, so our pushback got me invited to go to Washington and testify on that issue. And then that got Rob Bishop and his Natural Resource Subcommittee to come to Elko and hold a congressional hearing. We got 64 counties from around the West to support us, either with letters or resolutions or testimony. And when we finished, the Forest Service thumbed their nose at the Congressional Committee, at the 64 counties, and at us, and we got only one change, and that was that to retrieve mule deer, not elk, you can drive off-road for no more than half of a mile. That was the only concession that we got. So I'm talking to a commissioner down in southern Utah that was there giving testimony, helping us out, and I said, what are we going to do? And we decided to get together. We did. We started the American Lands Council with the idea of bringing more authority to more local control to our natural resources. Grant Gerber was in that meeting with us. There were 4 of us. I went to our state senator, Pete Gogachia, with the idea, let's do a bill like the 148 in Utah calling for the transfer. We took that to our Legislative Council Bureau. They said that if we do that, we're going to have to put a note of unconstitutionality with it because it is a demand. And so Pete Gogachia said, well, let's do this. Let's assume that the transfer has taken place, and let's study the implications of that transfer. And let's do it this way. Let's get one member of every county commission in the state, and we've got 17 counties in the state, and have them study this issue for a year. So we got that in the form of legislation, AB 227, that our legislature created the task force and gave us the instructions of what we're supposed to do. So we've got 17 of us. I was elected the chair of that, and when we started, I said, let's not vote on anything until we get a lot of information. Except for one thing, how many of you think it's a good idea to transfer the public land from the federal government to the state? And more than half of them said they weren't sure, or they didn't think it was a good idea. So we started out by contracting for an economic analysis to see if we could and what it would cost. And what that economic analysis showed us is, yeah, we can afford to make the transfer, and we can expect a net revenue at a minimum to the state of Nevada for owning and managing the public land of $350 million at least every year. So then we got our state agency people to come in, and we said, to get from where we are now to where we would have to be to manage our own public land, what do we have to do? And we found out it's not that big of a step. We were doing a lot of the things already that we would have to do if we were in that position. Then we started getting our stakeholders in. Well, there was always the legal questions, because you would hear people say, well, it's unconstitutional. It's all right that Nebraska has 3% and we have 87%, and still it's unconstitutional for us to get our public lands. So we got Tony Rampton, who was the Assistant Attorney General in Utah, to come and debate with the Professor Skalowski from University of Colorado, to come to us and do a debate and tell us, is this constitutional? Then we got all of the stakeholders that we could find to come in. Everybody from the Sierra Club to the Farm Bureau to the sportsmen, everybody that we could cram into 13 meetings during that 1 year and get all of the information that we could. Well, the Dr. Can't say his name, from the Sierra Club that came to make the presentation sent a PowerPoint presentation in, and to the person who got that PowerPoint presentation, they said, hey, I've got this presentation, that you want to look at it? So I got to look at it before we had the meeting. And so I said, before we heard the presentation, I just want to kind of give you what I think is a sense of where we are. We haven't been voting on anything, but I think we all agree on a number of these things. I think we are in agreement that we will take off the table, when we talk about this transfer, the national parks, national monuments, wilderness areas, Indian lands, military lands, and that we want valid existing rights to transfer, and that means if you can hunt on it now, fish on it, camp on it, graze on it, mine on it, prospect on it, now you're going to be able to do it then. That's important to us. We also want public land to remain public land. There's parts of it that we propose be sold, and I'll tell you that in just a minute, but I said the public land is, the idea of transferring this is not to put it into private ownership. So he got up to make his presentation. He said, I thought that we were going to be in disagreement with everything that you were doing. But he said, I can't find a place where we disagree, except that we don't trust the state. We don't trust the state to do that. But on those other issues, it's pretty hard to argue with common sense. Then we proposed that the land transfer in 2 phases. Phase 1 would include 7.2 million acres. And that, which is a very small part. If that whole 7.2 million acres were transferred, we would still have the largest public land holding in Nevada of any of the other states. But in the 7.2 million acres, there was included lands that have already been designated for disposal by the federal agencies, and they haven't been able to get through the process. And so we proposed selling those lands, phased, but just those lands. A lot of those, and that's what got Clark County, Las Vegas. That's where most of the people in Nevada live. And what really got that county commission on board was that they have so much public land around Las Vegas, in Las Vegas Valley, the RPMP land, Recreation Public Purposes land, that has, I was talking to a school principal down there. The school was on RPMP land. What do you call them, go out and cheerleaders. We're having a bake sale out on the lawn, and they had to get permission to do that because they were making revenue on RPMP land. So the other thing, though, I wanted to tell you about our task force and how we set that up is because what we wanted this to be was a ground-up effort that included as many of the people in the state of Nevada that we could who have an interest in this issue. So after every meeting that we would have, every commissioner would go back to their commission, and they would go to their newspaper and they would do a press release and say, we are going to discuss this issue at our next county commission meeting, and you're welcome to come and have input. So we had the input of every area in Nevada that had an interest in it. And when they did, when we went then to our legislature and we said, this is our recommendation, and this is the recommendation that we came out with, 50-some pages of how not only we should transfer the land and how we should use the money that is generated by the land, which was primarily used for education, but then how the land should be managed. And when we went to our legislature, we got it passed. And that was before the change, when now our legislature is dominant Republican than it was Democrat, and we got the support. It was interesting as we went through the process, and we started getting all of the information, and to watch the lights come on for those commissioners who thought it wasn't a good idea to transfer. And by the time we finished, we had 100% support from our commissioners. Every commissioner was instructed to go back to their commission and get a vote for support for it. Tom Collins, who was the commissioner from Clark County, had me go down and help him work with his. There's 7 commissioners that were all Democrats. Had me go down and help convince them that this was the thing to do. They got on board. Washoe County, where Reno is, got on board. We had 100%. It was passed through both houses of the legislature before the governor got a chance to sign it. Our Congressman, Mark Amadei, who is a good congressman, introduced it in Congress. It's 1484, H.R. 1484. Get that bill. I should have brought a whole bunch of copies of it for you to read. But it is a bill that is specific to the state of Nevada for the transfer of the public land. We're working on a bill now in Congress and on the Senate side that would be an omnibus bill that would say to the states, any willing states who want their land transferred, then bring a bill. We'll work it out. We'll get a transfer made. So, we we are optimistic. I went to Congress on the 26th of April, a couple of weeks ago, and testified on this bill. And I was surprised at the reception that we had and how the lights have started coming on here. That was the second time I've been there on this. And for the members of the Natural Resource Committee, how much optimism there is for this. In order to get something done like this, you can't just take your own values and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. Because if it were up to me, you know, we wouldn't be a public land state because of all of the production that could come out of our state if it weren't a public land state. But we're still going to be a public land state because that's where we've got to be to make this work. I was in Washington giving a speech to the Western. Am I running out of time? Okay. To the county, some organization back there, and a woman from Virginia said, you know, we have always viewed these as our public lands, and so it worries me that you're going to take them over and it's going to be run by the state and owned by the state. And I said, they're still going to be public lands. If whatever you can do out there now, if you want to go to Nevada and fish and hunt or whatever you want to do, you're going to be able to do that after this is transferred. They're going to be owned and managed by the state of Nevada. You're not going to be locked out like we get locked out of a lot of places when the feds are in charge. Anyway, sorry I took too long.
Not too long, it was just perfect.
Appreciate the chance.
And I just learned that you're jealous that I called Nebraska home. That's cool too.
You what?
You're jealous that I called Nebraska home.
Yeah. Well, we're going to copy you. We're not going to have 3%.
We have a question and answer session later this afternoon. Demar will be back. I'm going to go forego the questions right now, Demar. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Let's give him a round of applause
Right,
again, bringing it down to our level.